Good evening. I want everybody welcome to another live stream, and I'm going to be talking about African Americans in the Goth subculture in tonight's stream. And I'm going to take a minute to let everybody know that the stream is starting right now. Now, what is it? All right, I'll be ready. All right. Hi, Mashonda. Hi, Sean. What's up? 1 minute. I'm just going to let everybody know that the stream is getting ready to start. Up to Sketch Stevens. In tonight's stream, I'm going to be talking about African Americans in the Goth subculture. And this is a subject that really means a lot to me because a lot of people don't know about what contributions Black people have given to the Goth subculture and the Goth scene. And a lot of people don't even know about the Goth scene. So I'm going to give you a little rundown about the Goth subculture and what it's about first. And the Goth subculture is a culture that celebrates the beauty in dark things. So a lot of people who are in the subculture, they see beauty in things that a lot of people don't see beauty in. They see beauty in things that are dark, things that people would consider to be horrifying, things that people would consider to be grotesque, and things that would not naturally be considered what would be appealing to the masses. Now, African Americans have been a major part of the Goth subculture since the inception of the Goth subculture, when it started to evolve out of the punk movement of the late 1970s, because Goth came out of punk in the late 1970s, and that was what led to the beginnings of the scene. Now, the Goth subculture, like hip hop, is a music-based subculture, and the music is the foundation to the Goth subculture. So if you really want to know a lot about the Goth subculture, you really have to understand and appreciate the music of the subculture. Bands like Bauhaus, bands like Susie and the Banshees, bands like Sisters of Mercy, and bands, can't remember the name of another one, because I listened to a lot of Goth music over the last 3 to 4 years as I was working on the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy. And there are numerous bands that you really have to listen to the music to really understand what the whole subculture is about. There are other bands like Switchblade Symphony, Faith in the Muse, London After Midnight, and many others. And all of that music is available right now on websites like Spotify, and you can even find it on YouTube right now. What's up, Jerry Wilson? I'm going to give you an on-air shout out as I continue to talk about the African Americans in the Goth subculture. And again, you have to really listen to the music to understand it, because that is the foundation of the subculture. That's what brings all the people together, and the music is core to the subculture. A lot of people, they think it's the fashion, they think of the makeup and things like that that are visual on the outside, because the first thing that people see regarding goths. However, the foundation of it is the music. And that foundation, African Americans also had a major part in that. And we can see that when many darkly inclined songs that many people have produced, like Michael Jackson, when he produced Thriller, the song Thriller. That's a very darkly inclined song, and it relates to African American darkness. And other songs like Prince's Purple Rain, that has a lot of themes related to African American darkness. And there's a whole bunch of, let me see, there were some other ones. Bobby Brown's Feeling Inside, TLC's Waterfalls. All of those songs, those show African Americans' view of the darker side of life. So that's something that we really don't get talked about in the mainstream media, because in the mainstream media, oftentimes we're told that goth is a white thing. And that is the furthest thing from the case. Now, as I see it, when it comes down to the coverage of African Americans in the goth subculture, I kind of see how our contributions are buried and how our image is buried in the mainstream media, because your Black media outlets, they won't talk about African Americans in the goth subculture, nor will your white mainstream media outlets talk about it. And I believe that they're not talking about it because it does not fit the narrative of many in the mainstream media as relates to the Black image. Now, as it relates to the Black image, it's okay to talk about thugs, dope dealers, and gangbangers, but we cannot talk about African Americans in the goth subculture. And I found that to be quite troubling, because it clearly shows me that there is a conspiracy to create a narrative regarding Black people in media, and they don't want people to see Black people as goth because it doesn't fit the narrative or the story they want to tell about African Americans, or African Americans being a part of the goth subculture. They don't want to talk about it because they want a certain story regarding Black people, and they want a certain story regarding the Black image. So they're comfortable with the idea of a Black man and a Black woman being a thug, but they're not comfortable with the idea of a Black man and a Black woman being a goth. And I find that to be quite troubling, because again, African Americans have been a part of the goth subculture since its inception, but no one will ever talk about it. But I was one of the guys who knew about African Americans in the goth scene for many years, and it was one of the reasons why I got motivated to write goth characters in many of my books. Now, back in the 90s, I knew all about the goth subculture, and I saw how goths were being mistreated and how people were trying to project stereotypes about goths back then on talk shows like your Jenny Jones, your Ricky Lakes, and your Maury Poviches. And they would literally make fun of a lot of goths on there. And that making fun of them on these makeover episodes, that got escalated once we had the Columbine Massacre go on. Now, a lot of people thought back then that the Columbine Massacre, that Eric Harris and Gillen Klebold were goths because they wore black. However, that wasn't the case at all. Your Eric Harris and your Dylan Klebold were not goth, but what happened was a lot of bad stereotypes got projected onto a lot of goths regarding that whole incident, and people thought that people in the goth subculture, they thought they were violent, they thought they were deviant, and they projected a lot of stereotypes on goths as related to that whole Columbine incident. And they actually went around going to different goth clubs looking to see if they could find some goths in trouble. And that never happened because, in actuality, anyone who knows the goth subculture knows that most goths are pacifistic, most goths are nonviolent, and most goths, they don't go around looking for trouble. In fact, over 40 years of the goth scene going on, there has never been reported any sort of incident of violence in 40 years of the goth scene. And this goth scene has been going on again for 40 years, not just here in America, but it's been going on all over the world. But no one, again, knows about that because the mainstream media won't talk about it. Now, back to African Americans in the goth scene. And again, it's like a complete drought of information. Hey, Edek, what's up? And thank you, Raiders 48 Gates, for the donation. Hi, AJ Lestrange. Happy to hear you be here for the live stream where I'm talking about African Americans and the goth subculture. And when it comes down to African Americans, again, nobody wants to talk about our contributions to the scene or us being a part of the scene. And I wanted to shine a light on all of those brothers and sisters in the goth subculture back in about, for years. I've been wanting to shine a light on them for years because back in the 1990s, I created an African-American goth character, Colleen Anderson, who was supposed to be John Haynes's girlfriend in my first novel, The Changing Soul. And she was going to be featured in my revamped John Haynes, The Temptation of John Haynes. Now, The Temptation of John Haynes was one of those books where I put a lot of dark themes in it, and it has a lot of things that relate to me being darkly inclined. So this book, which was about the character of John Haynes, who was being tempted by this she-demon, Eastine, this was all another book that was related to my darkly inclined views because I'm a darkly inclined person. I see things from a very dark view. I've always seen them that way ever since I was a kid. And this was a book that was going to feature one of the first goth characters that I created, Colleen Anderson, but I just couldn't fit her into the story. So she got related to another story. But I've always wanted to feature a story with an African-American goth. And I finally got a chance to do that back around 2014 when I wrote the novel Spinster Ella. Now, Spinster Ella is the novel that I wrote featuring an African-American goth character. It was the first novel I wrote featuring an African-American goth character, Matilda Crowley. And I went and did over a year of research on the music, on the fashion, and I watched over a couple of 1,000 hours of YouTube videos to get the story right and to get the character right. Edek says his first exposure to goth culture was back in 1986 in Atlanta, and yeah, the goth scene was starting to grow back in the 80s. It was because it was like evolving out of time in that time. So you were going to start to see a lot of goths in that time because around that time, Beetlejuice came out, and we got our first exposure to one of the major icons of the goth scene, Lydia Deetz. That's the one I grew up with. She was the first goth woman I saw on a mainstream image next to Elvira. Those are the first two that I saw. And it's been around for a lot of years. And a lot of people, they have been dressing and acting in the goth scene since the late 70s, 80s. And my first exposure to it was, again, back in the 80s, because the 80s were a big time for horror movies. It was a big time for a lot of dark stuff. And I used to watch a lot of horror movies like Friday the 13th, the Jason movies, the Freddy movies. And I used to watch a lot of shows that came on Channel 11, like Tales from the Dark Side, and the horror anthologies like Twilight Zone. So I was really in depth. I knew a lot about a lot of dark stuff, and I always had a dark view of things. So that all those elements, they're a key. They're also part of the scene as related, in addition to the music. And there was a lot of stuff that used to watch back then all the time. But one of the big icons that came up in the 80s was Elvira, and there was Lydia Dietz in Beetlejuice. Now, Lydia Dietz was like an icon for my generation because her portrayal, Winona Ryder's portrayal of Lydia Dietz, inspired a lot of kids who were Gen Xers as they grew up in the goth scene. And I used a lot of that influence again when I was thinking about the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, because that was one of the major movies of my generation in high school. So that was an icon. That was an iconic movie for me. Edek was talking about are goth females witches, and no, goth females are not witches. When it comes down to a lot of women who are part of the subculture, that's a stereotype that has been projected a lot, and it's been projected a lot in the Black community, but it's not true at all. Now, there are some females in the subculture who practice Wicca, but there are also other females who are agnostic, and then there are some females who are occult, but there are also some Christian women who are a part of the goth subculture, and there are Muslims, and there are people of all denominations and all faiths. So there's a diverse array of viewpoints and opinions, but no, goth females are not witches. It's a stereotype that has been presented over the years regarding women in the goth subculture, but it is not true at all. I've listened to thousands of hours of videos from hundreds of people, and I have not seen any witches at all. Now, a lot of women in the goth subculture, they wear dark makeup and dark clothes, but they wear that because that's part of their fashion style and their aesthetic. Aji Lestrange was talking about Beetlejuice, the animated series. I used to watch that back in '89 when it was on ABC. I was one of my favorite shows, again, growing up, because I used to like watching Beetlejuice on television. And I have the live action movie on DVD. Actually, that was one of the first movies I saw. I saw it on Easter Sunday in 1988. I remember watching that in 1988. Edek asks, what drew my interest in the goth subculture? Well, what drove my interest in the goth subculture was I always knew that I was always a little different inside from the other kids in school. So I was always drawn to darker things, and I always had a bit of a darker or different view than things. And when I started seeing people being a part of the goth subculture in the late 80s, and then I started seeing them on the 90s on different talk shows, I started to feel a bit of a connection to them. So when I saw them, I saw people that I thought were more like myself, because I used to see I felt like there was a connection to me in them. So that's why I always drew an interest to the goth subculture, because I always felt like these were people who were like me. They grew up different. They grew up in a darker view. And my darker view, it comes from growing up in the South Bronx. Now, when I grew up in the South Bronx, I grew up away from all the other kids in the South Bronx. The other kids, they were living in the projects, and they were actually living better than me. Now, I was living on 3430 Park Avenue. I was living in this, one-bedroom apartment with my family, and this place was right next to the railroad tracks. And I got a really dark view of things, because all around me back in the 80s were all these abandoned buildings, burnt out buildings, all these abandoned lots. And it was like a really dark time in New York City. It was really one of the darkest periods in New York City. And I remember my mother, we used to go to school back then. She used to take me back to school. I remember my father would drive me to the barbershop on Frederick Douglass Boulevard, and we would just see so many abandoned buildings, so much, blight. And that's what really colored my view of the world and made me see things as really dark. Now, I go a little bit more in depth talking about that in the novel Spellbound, which is the first part of the Spinster Ella trilogy. And in this book, I talk about that dark period in the 1980s and all of the abandoned buildings. And I really talk about the darkest period, which was 89, where there was a crack epidemic going on, and it was really rough out there. I mean, it was like a literal war zone. You had the abandoned buildings, you had the destroyed crack streets, you had the whole New York City looked like a war zone. And I drew from that to write Spellbound, which was about Matilda Crowley's baby back years, where she first experiences the goth subculture and sees it as a refuge from the real life horrors that she was experiencing in the public school system at the time, because that's what I experienced growing up in the public school system, and the horrors that were going on around her, where you had crackheads who were just like zombies, and it was just one of the most horrific periods in New York City history. I'm going to try to leave a link to Spellbound if I can. Let me see if I can do it, if YouTube will let me do it. Okay, let me do it. So you can pick up Spellbound on Amazon. And in that book, I really talk about the darkest period in New York City history. And during that time, it was one of the roughest periods. It was like a real life horror movie. And I remember going to school in a real life horror movie in a horror type situation. And that was one of the things that was some of the inspirations for the Matilda Crowley character and her motivations to becoming a part of the goth scene, because she didn't feel like she fit into that world. And part of the story of Spellbound is her finding, as an introvert, finding her voice, and then finding a way to speak for herself and finding a way to build confidence in that dark period. I'm gonna go a bit more in depth in the Spellbound, but it was a really rough period. So when it comes down to that period in New York, that was another thing that was one of my inspirations for writing about, wanting to be a part of the goth subculture. So I look at it as that period. It was a lot of people were trying to survive, but there was also a lot of artistry and a lot of creativity. And the two places that were very creative were hip hop and the goth subculture. More people knew about hip hop, but not a lot of people didn't know about the goth subculture. And they didn't know that Black people were a part of the goth subculture. A lot of people, that part was never talked about in mainstream media. And that's something that I, again, wanted to shine a light on in my stories that I wrote. Spinster Ella, Spellbound, and The Legendary Mad Matilda. In these three books, I wanted to shine a light on African Americans in the goth subculture and what would motivate someone to become a part of the goth subculture. And I wanted people to learn about the goth subculture. EDEC X are all of my books available for purchase on Amazon.com. All of my books are available on Amazon.com. All of my books are available on Amazon in paperback, and they're also available on Kindle. So you can pick up every SJS Direct book on Amazon and on Kindle. At Amazon there, you can pick it up. All the books are there, and the entire Spinster Ella trilogy is there in paperback and Kindle. But I wrote the Spinster Ella trilogy. It actually evolved from as I learned more and more about the goth subculture, and and so it's funny. He says Jussie Smollett wants to join the goth subculture. I don't think they'll have him in the subculture because of the way he was behaving. But usually, most goths are open. They're good people, and they're open to accepting people. Um, I usually don't autograph any books e-deck unless I would be able to do a show. But usually I just go out here and I just publish the books because I want people to have the information. And again, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, because I wanted Black people, to have the information about the goth subculture so they could understand, what it was about and what it was, what the history of it was, and get an understanding about things so that they would not wind up buying into stereotypes. Because I've run into people even in my own family as I was writing and researching the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, and they were projecting all sorts of stereotypes to me about the goth subculture, saying things like goths worship the devil, goths are evil, and these are all lies. I have sat down again and I've watched thousands of hours of videos from people who I consider to be friends. And many of these people, they're genuinely nice, friendly people. And they're people that just have a different view of life and a different perception of life. And in America, I believe is if we're supposed to be about being freedom and have freedom of expression, then people have a right to express themselves. But in America, as it relates to the Black community, one of the big problems I saw growing up was that everybody was supposed to fit into the Black box that was acceptable to white people. And that was one of the main reasons why I wrote the second book in the Spinster Ella trilogy, Spellbound, which is about the darker shade of Black, as I called it, because as it relates to Black people, they're always trying to fit into that Black box that is acceptable to white people. And I got the inspiration for that title from the Susie and the Banshee song, Spellbound, and when she does the line that says, following in the footsteps of a rag doll, dance because you're entranced. And that made me think about the way Black people live and the way they think, because they want to fit into that Black box that is acceptable to white people. And with the Matilda Crowley character, I wanted to make a statement about this girl who was biracial and between the lines of Black and white. And because she could see between the lines of Black and white, she starts to see the spellbound Negro and their view of trying to fit into these boxes that are acceptable to Black people, like this dope dealer, like this thug, like this hood woman, or ghetto chick. And they're all trying to fit into a box that is considered there they can conform and be acceptable to white people. And she doesn't fit into any of those boxes. And the box they're trying to put her in, the tragic mulatto, this is the box that she sees is going to lead to her life coming to an end. And it's when she winds up getting suspended from school that she starts to see a new road for herself in the goth subculture. And as she enters the goth subculture, she walks down this dark road, which takes her down the road to a life where she has some growth. She develops self-confidence, she develops her self-esteem, and she starts to see a worth in herself. So she starts to grow as she enters the goth subculture and becomes a part of it. And the book is supposed to chronicle Matilda Crowley's life as a baby bat, because there are 3 phases to most goths as I see it. Usually people who are coming into the scene, they go through the baby bat phase, and in the baby bat phase, this is where They start to learn about the scene. They start to learn about the music. They start to learn about the fashion, and they start to learn about the makeup that is a part of the scene. And this is the start where they start beginning their journey into the scene, because as it relates to the goth subculture, it is a lifestyle, and it's a lifestyle that people go into because they have this darker view of life, and they have a darker perspective on things as related to the way they see the world. So that's why they enter the goth subculture, and that's why they wind up staying a part of it, usually into their old age. Because I've run into on Instagram goths who are 50 years old, 40 years old, and some people, again, they stay in the scene for 25, 30 years. Now, others will come into the scene and they may just come in for a year or two and leave, but that's just the way they are. They just come in because they think that they want to be a part of it, but then they decide that it's not the thing for them. But others come in and they stay in the scene for 20, 25, 30, 35 years. And again, I've run into people who are on Instagram who are 50 years old, 55 years old. And that's who I've run into on Instagram, because I have a lot more goth followers on Instagram than I have on Facebook and YouTube. But that's that's something that I was shocked to see. But I have a lot more goth followers on Instagram than I do on other social media. Luciano asks, are we talking about the goth subculture? Yeah, we are talking about the goth subculture, because a lot of Black kids, they want to know about the goth subculture. And I want to take a minute to help a lot of the brothers and sisters out here learn the truth about the goth subculture, because I've heard from people, other YouTubers like Angela Benedict and Orphea333, they have had people ask them about, being Black in the goth subculture, and they couldn't answer the questions because it takes somebody who is Black, who knows about the scene, to help them understand that there is a place for Black people in the scene. There has always been a place for Black people in the scene, and Black people have always made contributions in the goth scene. So I've seen many Black goth YouTubers. I was watching a lot of their channels as I was working on the Spinster Ella trilogy, and I learned a lot from those goth YouTubers like Gothic Soulflower, Rose Nocturnalia, and there was a couple more others. I Am George. There's many of them that were on here on YouTube, and sadly they don't. And Jessie King, she's a good friend of mine. She's been talking to me on the regular every time I do a comic video or a goth video, and I've been talking to a lot of the Black goths, but they don't usually post up on the regular like they used to, because thanks to the Google adpocalypse, a lot of goths had to wind up leaving YouTube because Google would demonetize their videos. And because their videos got demonetized, a lot of people stopped making content and they just left for Instagram. So that's what I saw. I saw the big migration about a year ago, because I remember when I was writing Spinster Ella trilogy, there were so many goths and they used to post almost every week. And I was subbed to about 50 to 100 channels. And sadly, thanks to the adpocalypse, we don't see that much goth content anymore. A lot of people, because they couldn't get their channels monetized, and some of the smaller channels, they just got completely cut off as a result of the second adpocalypse. A lot of goths had to wind up leaving YouTube because they just couldn't get their channels monetized, because a lot of people don't understand that it costs a lot of money to go out here and make content, and it takes a lot of time to make content. So a lot of those people, they were doing this in addition to their jobs, and some of them had wound up quitting their jobs just to make content full time, and they wanted to live off the ad revenue. But sadly, because of the adpocalypse, what happened was a lot of the great goth content, it wound up leaving YouTube, and a lot of the goth content providers, they couldn't do things like make those vlogs where they would go on trips or go out here and make those haul videos where they would talk about goth fashion or talk about goth makeup. Now, other goths, they started having issues in their personal life and they had to wind up leaving. And I was sad to see that because a lot of people were learning about the goth scene from a lot of those goth YouTubers, and they were learning a lot because I learned a lot from a lot of the goth YouTubers as I was working on the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy. And I learned from them, and that I took what I learned from them and I applied it to the books in the Spinster Ella trilogy because I wanted to share that information with the brothers and sisters out there. Yeah. Looking at the comments. Yeah, Gold Skittle says goth culture influenced the rap game, and yeah, it did influence rap. It influenced R&B, and you can hear that in several different musicians' songs. I know it definitely influenced Michael Jackson because when you look at his Thriller, that is clearly got a darkly inclined theme to it. And when you look at Janet Jackson's Black Cat, you can clearly hear, the goth and darkly inclined themes as related to that song. And TLC's Waterfalls has it, and Bobby Brown's Feeling Inside has it. I made an entire goth music mix and I posted it on YouTube, but then they blocked it. But it's on BitChute right now, and I go through all the darkly inclined songs that are out there. I remember the Jackson's Torture from back in the 80s. That clearly had a goth theme to it and goth influences. And even rappers like Busta Rhymes on Jess and King, she showed me how she did a whole series on it, talking about how rap was influenced by the goth subculture and how nobody talks about the goth subculture's influence and contributions to hip hop, because she went even further in depth talking about, the musical contributions on the Black side. And those musical contributions, again, they are not mentioned because a lot of people will sit there and go, this is R&B and hip hop. But when you start really looking at the music videos and you start listening to the tones of the music, you start to see the goth influences as related to it. So I knew, again, all about all this for over 20 years. And I always found it baffling that we never really got to see any sort of push as related to the Black media or the white media. And one of the things that I saw that got buried back in about 2009 was when Persia White had the band ZO3, which was a goth industrial band, and she was making goth industrial music. And they got next to no coverage and they got next to no press. And I looked at it back then and I said, this is quite troubling. I mean, here is a woman making goth music, but no one will talk about her making this music, and they won't give her videos any play. But that was one of the things that inspired me to create the Matilda Crowley character, because it was an interview that Persia White gave on Musgrove Entertainment that I watched, where she made the statement, "I'm so dark because I'm light-skinned." And that resonated with me because it was something, as a darkly inclined man, that was a part of my life growing up, because I always grew up on the dark side of light skin. And that was one of the themes that I explored in Spellbound. In addition to the Black people trying to fit in the white box, I explored the whole concept of the dark side of light skin. And the dark side of light skin is where people, they think that you have all these privileges to being light-skinned, but what happens is they don't see how you are objectifying this person all because of their skin tone or their hair texture, and you don't see them as a person. Because when it comes down to a lot of light-skinned people and biracial people in the Black community, there's a lot of people who objectify and sexualize light-skinned and biracial people, and they don't see them as human beings. And that's all goes into another part of the tragic mulatto paradigm, because you're trying to fit into both the black world and the white world, but you don't see any place for them. A QNX, what does it mean to be darkly inclined? Well, darkly inclined means that you have a darker view of life, but then you are not fully into the goth subculture. It doesn't mean, it means that you have dark views and dark ideas, but you're not all the way into the goth scene. You may like the music, you may like the style, but you're not, fully into the goth subculture. And that's what darkly inclined means. Now, a goth person, again, they have a darker view. They see everything from a darker view, and they're fully immersed into the goth lifestyle. So it's a completely different view of things. And that was something I learned from Angela Benedict as I was doing research for the Spinster Ella trilogy. She was talking about that, and I really wanted to make sure that people knew that there was a difference between darkly inclined and goth, because a lot of people, they think that both are the same, but they're not. So again, I'm a darkly inclined person, but I have not really gone full goth. So would Batman be considered a goth character? That's kind of hard to say. I mean, Batman's whole city is very gothic looking, and I don't know. I think he would be more darkly inclined. Because Tim Burton, who made the first Batman '89, a lot of goths, they like his movies, but he's not goth. He's darkly inclined. The same thing with Marilyn Manson. A lot of people listen to Marilyn Manson. They think that he's a goth band, but he's actually a pop band. So that's something a lot of people in the scene, they want people to understand there's a complete difference. I don't know if Tupac would be considered darkly inclined. His stuff isn't really that dark. I mean, Cool G Rap, I think he would be darkly inclined, because G Rap, he went into some really dark stuff. If you listen to Ill Street Blues, On the Run, Streets of New York, that I could consider to be some darkly inclined rap out there. I don't know about many rap groups that I would consider. EDEC asks, which rap groups would you say, without a doubt, are goth influenced? They say Gorillaz is goth influenced, but I don't really know of too many that would be considered to be goth influenced. I know that they take ideas from the subculture, but I don't know. DMX, yeah, I think he might be darkly inclined, but I know G-Rap would be. I know Rakim's In the Ghetto. That's kind of a dark song, but it just varies from different musicians. And that was one of the things I was trying to do when I was writing the third book in the Spinster Ella trilogy, Legendary Man Matilda. I was trying to incorporate a lot more black music into it, because I just didn't want it to be, a lot of the traditional goth music, because as I was writing the trilogy, I wanted to incorporate more of our music so that people could see, the dark influences of our music, and see the beauty in our dark music. EDEC asks if some of the elements of goth negative, in my opinion. Not really. I mean, most of the stuff that I see in the goth subculture is pretty harmless. Most of these guys who are in the scene, they just have a darker view, but again, they're very pacifistic, they're very nonviolent, and most goths are introverts. Most goths are really shy. From what I've seen, a lot of goths struggle with things like social anxiety disorder, so they are more scared of you than you are of them. So when it comes down to people in the goth scene, they're a lot of nice, friendly people, and if you get to know them, there's not really that much negative as I see it in the scene. I don't see, a lot of the negativity like I see as related to thug culture or gang culture. It's a very open scene, and then they really are very accepting of people. And they're quick to shut stuff down like racism, because there's been a bunch of white supremacists trying to come into the scene, and people in the scene have been really bringing the hammer down on that and saying that they don't want that in their scene. Blade, I would say he's a goth character. Blade, the whole movie, Blade is very goths, and it's a very textbook example of what I would call a black goth movie. Now, as it relates to the movies, The Crow was considered one of the big movies in the subculture, but I think one of the most underrated movies is Blade, because Blade clearly, as I see it, showed us, the first black goth hero, and it had a lot of goth themes and it had a lot of goth stuff in it, and a lot of people they don't really look at it as a goth movie, but I see it, as a goth movie, and I think a lot of black goths really need to start, talking about Blade, because the Blade movies show that our dark view of the world. No, Edict, Columbine was not, had nothing to do with goth, and had nothing to do with goth at all. So what the media wanted to do was the media wanted to create stereotypes about the goth subculture, and they wanted to project stereotypes on the goth subculture so they could have a way to excuse the Columbine shooters for the murders they participated in. But the Columbine killers had absolutely nothing to do with the goth subculture. Now, what the media wanted to do was they wanted to demonize goths, and they wanted to project a stereotype on goths. So they went around going to different clubs, looking for violence, looking for trouble, looking for drama. And what they did was go out here looking to make goths look like the bad guy. But after a couple of months, what they found was, again, 40 years of the scene, and there's never been a single episode of violence in the scene at all. So their attempts to try to project the stereotype on the goths was a complete failure, but the stereotype still lingers. But again, from my research of the goth subculture, we've had 40 years of the scene and zero incidents of violence. Yeah, Blade did save the comic book movie LKM Cherokee. It did. It literally revived the whole thing after Batman and Robin killed it. Luciano is asking, why are black people in the anime considered more nerdy than goth? I'm going to answer that question because as it relates to the goth subculture, anime, manga, and comic books, they're all part of the same scene. And if you go to a Comic-Con, like I have over the last 20 years, you will see goths, manga fans, sci-fi fans, fantasy fans, and comic fans. They're all together as part of the same scene. It's all interconnected and it's all together. So when I look at that, not one is no different than the other. When I look at a comic fan, a sci-fi fan, a fantasy fan, or a manga fan, or a goth, they're all the same person to me because they're all part of the same scene and they're into the same thing. Most goths are in the comics, most goths are in the sci-fi. Many of them have action figure collections, many of them are in the video games, and many of them have and many of them are into literature and art. So it's something that all of us do, and it's the thing that brings a lot of us together because if you go to a Comic-Con, you're going to see goths at the Comic-Con right alongside the manga fans, the sci-fi fans, and the fantasy fans. They all enjoy the same hobbies. So, and Columbine wasn't influenced by video games. These were just two beta males who just did not know how to conflict resolve or problem solve. So it wasn't about video games. It wasn't about the goth scene. It was just two individuals who just did not know how to function in the real world. Edex says there needs to be a documentary on how the film Blade saved the superhero industry. And yeah, they do need to talk about that. Waykar was talking about cyberpunk, and that was a part of the whole Cybergoth thing. And I believe that was influenced partially by The Matrix and Batman Beyond. And that was some of the things that influenced what they call Cybergoth. And one of the things that I have hypothesized is that Cybergoth, which many people call in the goth scene, they have a lot of negative views on cybergoth, but I believe that's what led to what I call the goth generation gap, because a lot of the kids who liked cybergoth, what happened to them was they were ridiculed by many of the traditional goths because 20 years had passed, and these kids were trying to express themselves, and that's what I believe led to the goth generation gap, which is what we have right now. And I've made videos talking about the goth generation gap, how we have two generations of goth and they don't really connect with each other, because I believe of the cybergoth rift, which started in about 1999 and ended around 2005. But I see a little bit of a resurgence of goth online. And again, I would like to see more brothers and sisters who are curious about the scene learn more about the scene so they can go out here and explore the scene. Now, when I wrote Spellbound, which was actually the second book in the trilogy, the reason why I wrote Spellbound was because I wanted people to understand Matilda Crowley's baby bat years. Because when I wrote Spinster Ella in 2015, I just wrote the African-American goth heroine, but I didn't feel it was fair to just give you an African-American goth heroine without showing you the character's history and backstory so that you can understand why she came into the scene and why she wanted to be a part of the scene. I just felt, showing you 40-year-old Matilda Crowley who is living a goth lifestyle, that wasn't enough. I wanted to give readers an in-depth understanding of the goth subculture. And I felt the only way I could do that was, again, to write another book, which was Spellbound, which was about Matilda Crowley's baby bat years. Now, the baby bat years, again, are the beginnings of a person exploring the goth subculture and coming into the goth scene. So I wanted people to really understand where Matilda got her motivations to become a part of the goth subculture. And again, part of that motivation was her being an introvert, struggling to find her voice, and her dealing with bullies, and her trying to find out what type of girl she was growing into, the woman she was going to become. So this is I believe I wanted to write a really great book, for young brothers and sisters who wanted to know about the goth subculture and understand it. And I spent hours watching numerous videos from numerous goth YouTubers so I could give Black people the most positive book featuring a goth heroine overall and a better understanding of the goth scene overall. And I'm going to put a link to Spinster Ella, because that was the book that started everything, up on the chat in a minute. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. The link to Spinster Ella, and it didn't come up. You can find that book on Amazon.com as well. And that book is the final book in the trilogy. And one of the funny things about Spinster Ella is I wrote it actually backwards, because, again, I just was learning so much about the scene, and I wanted to share that information in those books, in all three books. And the third book, The Legendary Mad Matilda, it deals with Matilda Crowley as she's becoming into the adolescent phase of the goth subculture. And after people come out of their baby bat years, they come into their adolescent phase. And this is the phase not a lot of goths talk about too much, because this is the phase where you're just going and exploring different parts of the scene and exploring different genres of music, like industrial, and you're trying to figure out where you want to be in the scene. Now, I did this story talking about Matilda Crowley's adolescent phase, where she's the Mad Matilda character, where she has these pigtails and she's wearing a completely different style of clothing. And that's just like a teenager, as I saw it. You're trying to figure out what style fits you. And this story, I wrote it to take place in around 1995 as Matilda Crowley is graduating from Columbia University, and she's trying to figure out what direction she wants to take her life in the story. So she suffers a major mishap after one of her raves goes wrong, and in this story, I talk about her as she falls down after this tragedy that befalls her when one of her raves gets busted by the cops. She then tries to start rebuilding her life. So in Legendary Mad Matilda, we see Matilda grow out of her adolescent phase in the goth scene as she's exploring the industrial side of the scene. And in this story, we start to see Matilda starting to see a bigger picture as related to the goth scene, because um, it was as I was doing research for this story that I started to really understand the whole scope of the goth subculture, because the goth subculture is huge. And I started to understand that the goth subculture isn't a small thing, it's a huge thing, and it's an international thing. As I started realizing that I was watching videos not only from people in the United States, I was watching videos from people in the UK, I was watching videos from people in Germany, I was watching videos from Muslims, I was watching videos from people in Asia, and videos from people in Australia. And I started to understand that the goth subculture is a huge international scene, and it's something that includes almost everybody in the world. So whenever I would hear somebody like one of these fake white supremacists now trying to come into the scene saying goth is white, I had irrefutable evidence that showed me that there were people all over the world expressing their dark views all over this world, and they were going and expressing their dark views and adopting a goth lifestyle because they wanted to be a part of this scene. And this scene was open to everybody, and it has a place for everybody. So that was something I wanted people to understand, but I also wanted them to understand that there were different phases to the goth subculture. I wanted people to know that beginners, they come in as the baby bats, and then as they grow up into the adolescent phase, they start exploring different parts of the scene. They start exploring different parts of the life and find the lifestyle they want to live in the scene. And after they find the place they want to be, they then eventually, if they stay in the scene, they become elder goths like Matilda Crowley did in Spinster Ella, and they go on to have their lives, go on in this scene. So they go on into their 30s, their 40s, and that's what they do when they come into the scene. Some people come in and they stay for their entire lives in the scene because they find it a place where they can have friends, where they feel safe. And that's a big thing, as I saw it, as related to the goth subculture, because a lot of people are introverts, and with introverts, usually have a nice night, Gold Skittle. Glad to have you here. With most introverts, when you have a safe place, that's where most people want to go and stay. Because when you're an introvert like myself, because I have anxiety and I'm a shy person. When you find a place with people who you feel safe and comfortable with, you just stay in that place and you feel comfortable and you stay there because it's a secure place. Because when it comes down to shy people, they want to feel safe there. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people come in the scene and stay there, because they're listening to music and sharing things with friends, and that's one of the reasons why they come into the scene. Um, George asks, "Is this a Sean James live stream?" Yes, it is my live stream, and yeah, a lot of goths are introverts, and again, part of that's something I also explore in other videos, and I talk about the goth generation gap, and that generation gap is something that nobody is really dealing with, but I see the introvert part as another part of it that needs to be dealt with, because a lot of shy people, they struggle with dealing with older people, and they struggle dealing with younger people. So that's another part of it that people aren't really dealing with, but it was something I dealt with in a couple of videos, because I really want to see that bridge built between younger goths and older goths, and I want to see them form that relationship and reconnect with each other, because um, the scene is, as I see it, really strong because of the people. Some people were trying to say that goth was dying for a while, but I don't believe that it's truly dead, because it's the people who made the scene, and it's the people who can keep the scene alive. So that's something that I believe is important, and it's important for people to be, you know, get excited about the scene and have that passion for it, because um okay, I'm looking at something else. All right, all right, I'll get back to this. Yeah, why are goth people so much into rock? Well, the foundation of goth music was rock music, because it came out of the punk scene of the 1970s. I'm answering George's question. That's where goth culture came from. It came from the punk scene of the late 1970s. Now, I listened to a lot of music from the goth scene back in the 80s when it was being played on Z100. Music like The Cure and all these bands. I think it was NXS. Some people say NXS is a goth band. I don't know if it is. I've heard it. I heard it in Julian Venter's Gothic Charm School, but I used to listen to a lot of their music as just regular music. So the foundations of goth music come from rock music. It doesn't come from hip hop. Hip hop takes some influences from it, and but a lot of people again don't see it because they don't really acknowledge too much of African Americans' contributions to the goth scene. So I can see the goth influences even back in the 80s with certain videos like Michael Jackson's Thriller or Janet Jackson's Black Cat, or even a video that I watched from a rap group called Kings of Pressure, which is called Tales from the Dark Side. That video was on YouTube. So there is a lot of that music out there. Oh, hi, I am George. I'm glad to see you here. But there's a lot of influences there. I mean, there's even dark themes in a Temptation song called Papa Was a Rolling Stone. And all of those themes, when nobody talks about them, they just give them a pass and just say that it's the R&B genre or the pop genre. But you can clearly see, hi, I am George. I am George's goth YouTuber. I watched some of his video or her videos to write the um, Spinster Ella trilogy, and he's one of the black goths that's on the scene. But that's one of the influences. It comes from rock music. It comes from there because a lot of the core bands, that was the foundation of it. So yeah, Gravediggers, they were the closest thing that we got to a goth hip hop band, but they don't talk about that again either, because mainstream media and black media, they have just they've put a gag order on anything as related to black goth music or anything as related to the black goth subculture. They've just buried it overall, and they just won't talk about it. And that was one of the things, again, that annoys me about black media. They can talk about gangbangers, they can talk about dope dealers, they can talk about thugs, but they won't talk about goths. They won't even feature an article talking about the black goth subculture. And I can find information. I went to Tumblr, and it was the F Yeah Black Goths. There's a whole website, whole blog there talking about black goths and talking about black goths and the things that they're doing in the scene. And it's just not talked about on any of these mainstream platforms. And it just really, that's one of those things that really irritated me, because again, I wanted to give more exposure to the black goth subculture and everything in the black goth culture, from the fashion to the music to the aesthetic, because nobody wants to ever talk about it. I mean, outside of a few people like Persia White, she tried to let people know about it. Around 2009, she was trying to let people know with her ZO3 band, and other people like the Gravediggers. They were out here trying to talk about it, but they just can't get any traction because the black media won't let them get any traction. It's just, they just get buried. And that's one of those things that is really sad, because so many black girls and black boys, they want to know about the Black Goth subculture, and they want to learn more about the Black Goth subculture. And Waykar asked me, do I feel if the black church communities had a lot to do with it? I don't think the black church has anything to do with it. I think it's just mainstream forces in the media. I think they have a big problem with it because they want black people to walk lockstep with that ragdoll dance and trance, because a lot of black people, they're scared of coming outside of the box. They're scared of coming out and exploring a different style of blackness. They want to fit into that white box, that black box that's acceptable to white people. And they believe they have to conform to the standards that are acceptable to white people. And they fear or any sort of reprisal. So that's why they don't want black people going out here and expressing themselves and doing things like going out here and being in the goth subculture. And Jeffrey A makes a good point there. Black people are like a monolith, and they want everybody to be the same, and they don't want anyone to be different. So it's a big problem related to the black community, in that they want everybody to be this, either this thug or this hood rat or this baby mama or this Uncle Tom, or they want you to fit in these little boxes that are acceptable and will get you the attention of white people, but they don't want to explore what it means to define your own blackness. And when I was writing the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, that was one of the things I wanted to explore, especially in Spellbound, because I believe that the darker shade of black is the one that we define, and I believe it's the one that allows us to find out what we consider to be black and what we consider to be acceptable as black. So that is something that we want, that we should want, because when you fit into those black boxes that are acceptable to white people, what it does is that it limits your growth as a person, and it prevents you from actualizing your potential. So that's something I want black people to do, is start exploring different aspects of black. And one of the things that a lot of people want to do is explore, the Black Goth subculture, because they want to find out what it is and what it's about, so they can find their identity. Because what happens is, when you're in these boxes that are acceptable to white people, people wind up chafing, they wind up becoming frustrated, and they wind up not really actualizing their potential as people. They never really grow to take themselves to the next level. So that's something that I wanted to show black people, that, you got this freedom in 1865 from slavery, but what's really sad is your freedom is not being restricted by just these white racists out here, but it's also being restricted by black people who want to force unwritten social rules on you, and they want to keep you conforming to these boxes so that they can be acceptable by white people and get the approval of white people, when in actuality, we need to find approval and acceptance of ourselves. We need to find value in ourselves. And if that means us doing things like becoming a part of the Black Goth subculture and learning about the Black Goth subculture, then that's a good thing, because then we are finding out who we are and finding out what we want to be and what we want to define as black. So that's something I wanted to be a part of Spellbound. I wanted that to be a major part of it. I'll see if I can scroll up and get to your last question. Um, To Be Love My Smile says he never caught me live. I do live streams every Tuesday and Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday. Usually these days, Wednesdays at 12 o'clock. I'm usually doing comic stuff, but I did this one because I wanted people to learn about the goth scene. Let me see if I can get George's question. Um, and he asked the question, George Rogers asked, why do white supremacists try so hard to make goth culture a space of theirs, but not country culture? Well, when it comes down to white supremacists, what they want to do is they want to control the narrative as related to culture. And most of these white supremacists, they need a smooth world. And usually with their smooth world, what they need is for people to fit into these boxes that are acceptable to them. So white supremacists, they become uncomfortable when they hear about Latina goths. They get uncomfortable when they hear about Muslim goths. They get really uncomfortable when they hear about Asian goths. And they get super uncomfortable when they hear about black goths. And the thing that makes them uncomfortable is that you have people who are not fitting into the boxes that allow their world to be smooth. Because in order for the white supremacists to feel comfortable, they need to have your Asians working in laundries or Chinese restaurants. They need your Hispanics to be picking fruit or living in poverty. And they need your black people to be welfare queens and baby mamas. Thank you, Reg the Bad Guy, for the $2 donation. And K Tim, thank you for the $10 donation. They want you to fit into these boxes because that means that their place at the top of the white supremacist food chain is secure. And as long as black people are at the bottom of their smooth world and their social hierarchies, they feel the most secure. So when they start seeing black goths coming out, this terrifies them because goth for them is supposed to be a white thing and it's supposed to be a thing at the bottom of the world. So I look at that and I say, yeah, the white supremacists, they want people to fit in their boxes so that they can feel safe about their place in the world. And it just shows how insecure most racists are. I Am George says for a few months on Instagram, black goths were being told by white racists that they didn't belong in the scene. And yeah, that's been going on. And Lygia Resurrected talked about it. Angela Benedict has talked about it. And they have literally, I've seen the goth scene literally come out in force to shut these racists down because they don't want these people coming into their scene and they don't want these people destroying the scene because people have been in the subculture for many years. And again, I used to see so many goths, black, white, Latino, Asian. I used to watch their channels for the last 3-4 years as I was writing the Spinster Ella trilogy. And I learned from all those goths all over the world about how inclusive the scene was. And I learned about how inclusive the scene is because I saw that inclusion and I got that acceptance from those people in the scene because they, as I talked about Spinster Ella and I was promoting Spinster Ella, it was goths who were helping me get the word out about the book, and it was black goths who came out in force to help me get the word out because they understood how important the book was in showing that there was a story of a black goth, and that was one of the things that really motivated me to keep going with the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, was seeing that support from all the people in the scene coming out and helping me promote the book and helping me get the word out about the book because so many people, they came out in force. I mean, I've done other books and I would get no support. Like when I did my first ISIS book, I got a lot of resistance, but the goths came and they came out in force. And I remember on Tumblr, they were letting people know, look, there's a book about an African-American goth. And that was the first time I ever had somebody actually actively go out and promote one of my books out here. I see pupils ask me if I'm a black goth. No, I'm a darkly inclined black man. I wish I could have been a goth. When I found out it was a little too late about the scene. I mean, I knew of different characters like Elvira and Lydia Dietz back in the late 80s and early 90s, but if I had known about the scene back in the late 80s, probably I would have been a black goth. It just probably would have happened. But no, I'm a darkly inclined person. I like Tim Burton. I just want more people to know about the scene. Um, and I want people to learn about the scene so that they can find and discover what they love about being black. Bloodsport says I can still be one, but I'm 45 and I don't know. I still listen to the music. I still, I listen to a lot of the music. I still have the MP3s. A lot of the music, it was very inspiring to me. Because Spellbound inspired Spellbound, and London After Midnight's Where Good Girls Go to Die, that inspired Legendary Mad Matilda. Legendary Mad Matilda was inspired by the song from London After Midnight, Where Good Girls Go to Die, because I listened to the song, and the song he said he was talking about, strippers, but I took it as a woman entering corporate America as, the good girl going to die, because she was going to see all of these horrors as related to corporate America. So that was one of the things that made me think about when I was writing Legendary Mad Matilda. And I also drew some things from Empire Strikes Back, and I wanted it to be, a story about Matilda coming into adolescence, from her goth adolescence and into her adulthood, and how it would shape her adulthood as she entered the goth subculture. George Rogers is talking about. I've always known about the goth subculture. I've been here, listening to it and knowing of it ever since the '90s. But I wanted people to learn about it because I hear so much misinformation regarding it, especially in the Black community. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, one of the reasons why I make videos, and one of the reasons why I'm doing this live stream, because so many Black kids out here, they just get so much misinformation, and that misinformation prevents them from learning about a scene that they could be a part of and would feel comfortable about being a part of, because there are large groups of Black goths out there. They're online, they're at the clubs, they're all over, but they don't get any, again, people don't talk about it because, again, in the Black community, we have these Black people who just want to fit into a box. They want to be accepted by white people, so they want to deny other people and their right to express themselves. And that was something I dealt with growing up back in the 1980s, where everybody felt like they needed to fit into this good Black box or this street box or these boxes that they believe would get white people's attention. And that's not something we should do to ourselves, because if we as Black people have our freedom, we should have the freedom to go out here and express ourselves. We should have the freedom to go out here and explore different scenes, and we should have the freedom to be a part of different scenes. Yes, there is going to be racism in the goth subculture, and there has been, but you shouldn't let that deter you from going out here and finding a place where you want to be. Because as I see it, life is too short to go out here and live on somebody's terms. You should be going out here and actualizing your potential, because that's what God would want you to do. He would want you to go out here and find the place that you feel comfortable in and find things that you feel comfortable doing. And again, life is too short to live it doing things to fit into a box. And as I see it, one of the things I admire about a lot of goths is the confidence they have to go out here and be the person they want to be and do the things that they feel comfortable doing. That's one of the things that I've always admired about people in the scene, is that while they are introverts, they have the courage to go out here and be themselves. And that's something that I've always looked at goths and admired them for. Icy People says, yes, it's still very much like that in school. If you listen to anything else, yeah, that happens to Black kids all the time. It used to happen to me back when I was in high school and junior high school. Yeah, if you don't fit into the box, you're not listening to hip hop, then you're considered not Black. And that's something that I feel have always felt, ever since I was 12 years old, to be extremely wrong for people to just sit there and tell someone that they should fit into this black box and just do so-called black things. And that's not what you should do at all. Instead, you should just be yourself and be the person you want to be, because again, life is too short, and you should go out here and enjoy the life that God gave you. Um, George Rogers says he's got another question. Let me see, the one after Icy Pupils comment. Oh, Edek, I'm gonna answer his question. Oh, let me see. George Rogers, I'm gonna answer his question. Being a black goth is about the most individual's identity. Yeah, I would say that it's about having an individualistic identity, because every goth has their own view. They have a darker view, and they're following certain standards as related to the scene, but they're allowed to express themselves and be the person they want to be. So they are very individualistic, and it's not about this monolithic thought. It's about you finding the person you want to be and having the style you want to have. So now I'm going to answer Edek's question. Are there levels to being an elder goth? Is that such a thing? That's more, I think that that's a hierarchy title, but it's not. It's like an imaginary title. It's something you earn over the years of being in the scene and the lifestyle. That's the third phase of goth, as I see it, because when I did Spellbound, that was the baby bat. Legendary Mad Matilda was the adolescent, but the elder goth is someone who is usually in their late 30s, early 40s. They have grown, they have lived the goth lifestyle, they have gained a lot of wisdom, and what they want to do is mentor and teach younger kids and teach them about the scene so that they can learn and grow in the scene and find their way in the scene. So there are elders out there like Angela Benedict, she's an elder, and a couple of other people. And what they want to do is go out here and mentor people and teach them things about the scene so that they don't wind up getting a bunch of misinformation. And it was Angela Benedict's videos that were a big help to me in writing Spinster Ella, Spellbound, and Legendary Mad Matilda. And another elder, Amy Necrotique, her videos were a big help to me in writing Legendary Mad Matilda, because I wouldn't have been able to write many of the club scenes if it wasn't for her. So it was a lot of people in the scene who were helping me, like Lygia Resurrected. I learned a lot from Absinthe watching her videos, and Drac Macon, she's no longer here anymore. I watched a lot of her videos to learn about makeup, and Black Friday, she taught me a little bit about the culture internationally. So Tomax asks if goth is a European creation. Yeah, it did come out of the UK in the 1970s, and it came out of again, that punk scene that was a part of the UK. So that's where goth really came from. It's part European, but African Americans, we were a part of the scene here in America, and we did put our own take on things when we created our part of the scene and made our contributions to the scene. So when we were a part of the scene, but we put our own takes on things. So Bloodsport asks, where did the goth culture come from? He's a horror movie head. Again, the goth subculture comes out of the punk scene. It evolved out of the punk scene in the late 1970s, and it grew into a subculture in the 1980s. And the foundation of it is goth music, which is Bauhaus, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, and many other bands like London After Midnight, Switchblade Symphony, Faith in the Muse, and many others. And it also comes out of horror movies and horror icons like Lydia Dietz, Elvira, and it also comes out of other movies, 50s horror movies. So it's a big part of that too. So it's a lot of things that are darkly viewed, but when it comes down to black dark views, we really don't get much people talking about things as related to the goth subculture. Now, as I see it, people talk about The Crow. That was a big movie in the 90s for a lot of people in the goth scene. But I see Blade as a major part of the goth subculture as well, because Blade really showed the dark view of the world from black people. That film, as I see it, should be a major influence for every black goth out there, and every black goth should really, make more efforts to talk about Blade, because the films of the Blade trilogy, as I see it, they showcase an example of black goth, and it showcases it beautifully. Now, I myself, yeah, some of it was. I remember seeing Blondie in a rap video back in the early 80s. So, yeah, a lot of the punk stuff was a major part of hip hop. And you have to watch, I used to watch the music videos on U68 back in the day. And I used to see the connections like to punk and hip hop back in the early 80s. So, yeah, it was a major part of hip hop because, again, hip hop and punk and goth, they all came about in the early and mid 80s. And I was a kid back then, but I could see it back then. So I could see the major influences back then watching things like U68, because back then there was no cable. So the only way you could watch music videos was on something like Friday Night Videos or the channel U68, which came about, I think, about 85, 86. Yeah, that's the UWF channel, where they had under, what is it, UWF? It's a wrestling federation. I can't remember the U part. Oh yeah, New York Hot Tracks. That was, yeah, it was channel 25, I think. That was a 30-minute show. You got to watch like what, 4 music videos in New York Hot Tracks, or no, it was video tracks. New York Hot Tracks, I think, was channel 7, or no, it was channel 4. It was one of them. There was a couple of them. Yeah, Video Music Box, that was channel 31. That was PBS, and that's where I used to watch a lot of rap videos. And that's where I saw that goth rap video. Oh yeah, New York Hot Tracks was on channel 4. I know, it was like there was 3 of them. There was one on channel 7. There was one on channel 4. Friday Night Videos was channel 4. That's the one that was NBC, was Friday Night Videos. And yeah, Friday Night Videos. Hot Tracks, I think, was ABC, and Hot Tracks, yeah. You didn't miss much. Just me answering a couple of questions, me trying to talk about the goth subculture a little bit more, giving people a little bit more understanding of Luciano, and trying to help people understand a little bit more about the goth scene. That's not. You could probably rewind it when I play the video coming up. So. Okay, you can ask the question again. I'll be glad to answer it. Okay, what's your question, Luciano? But yeah, we used to watch a lot of music videos that way because there was no cable here in New York City. All right, we can ask. I'll answer it. But the whole thing is that I'm really talking about African Americans in the goth scene. So that's the key. That's the theme of today's live stream, is that I'm talking about the goth scene. So, but I'm trying to get my thoughts organized here. But Tomax asks, can you recommend some good black goth music to listen to? Gravediggers is good. I've listened to some of theirs. There was a couple of songs, Kings of Pressures, Creep Show, Tales from the Dark Side. It's not a goth song, but has a lot of goth themes to it. Some of Cool G Rap's music, I can recommend that. But when it comes down to it, a Persia White's Z03 is also very good. She made a great album, and that's one you want to listen to. Okay, I Am George. He can really help you with that. Okay. Oh, he's really helping us out. Different bands. I gotta check out some of this stuff. I've been learning about this for 4 years, and I'm still learning. He's talking about Light Asylum and Flatliners. I'm gonna have to listen to them. Okay, he's asking something that's related to my book, The Man Crisis. White males increasing in criminality more than ever. Would you say that the beta male syndrome is in action? Yeah, that's beta male syndrome in action. And what black people have to do is just keep their distance because, again, with the beta male, he's a ticking time bomb. So you don't know when he's going to explode or what he's going to do when he explodes. So there's not much you can do except just keep your distance and just look out for yourself. So that answers Luciano's question. I'm going to get back to the scene. And again, African Americans, they want to be a part of the scene. And again, I wanted to do this live stream because not that many, a lot of the Black Goth YouTubers, they haven't been around because of the adpocalypse. So I want them to know that there's a place for them in the scene. There's people who want to see you in the scene, and they want to include you in the scene. And I want to be able to try to help build that bridge towards you. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this live stream, because so many brothers and sisters, they want to come into the scene, but they are told that this is something that's white, which is another lie that they're told, that, oh, if you want to explore goth music or you want to become a part of the goth subculture, you're acting white. And that's not acting white at all. Again, there have been Black people in the goth subculture since the inception of the scene. They have been a part of the scene since day one. And there is every reason for you to go out here and explore the goth subculture for yourself and find out about it for yourself. And you shouldn't let people try to hinder you by trying to fit you into the black box that's acceptable to white people. So yeah, that's true. I am George. They're all on Instagram. I mean, everybody I have seen, they're all on Instagram because I have so many goth followers on Instagram now. And a lot of them, they don't make YouTube channels because some people, they just don't have time because a lot of people, they work. And others, they just were so hurt by the adpocalypse that they just don't have an incentive to go back out here. So that was one of the reasons why a lot of goths moved to Instagram. Instead of going out here. Oh, Audrey Lestrange says she blogs. And yeah, they're on blogs too, because that's where I went to Tumblr when I was doing research for Spinster Ella, was I went to the FEA Black Goths on Tumblr. And that's where you're going to see a lot of the Black Goths. You're going to see them either on Instagram or you're going to see them on Tumblr. But I haven't seen a lot on YouTube because, again, they just don't have the time to do that. I guess a lot of people, they were de-incentivized to do that because Google went and demonetized all those small goth channels. Because a lot of the smaller channels, they only had like 2,000, 3,000 subs, and some of them only had like 200 subs, and that didn't really give people incentive to go out here and keep making videos because a lot of people, they were doing this in their spare time, and things like the makeup tutorials, that costs money. Things like the haul videos, that they cost money, and videos talking about the scene and talking about films, that also costs a lot of money. So it's one of those things that de-incentivized a lot of people from coming in and talking about the scene, in addition to people like Google blocking music, because a lot of goths, they want to share music, and it's hard to do that because Google will just take a video you post and you're trying to share this band with people so that people will know about the music, and they'll block it. Like when I was doing the Black Goth music mix, I was trying to show darkly inclined music from R&B and hip hop performers, and what they did was they blocked that whole mix, and it was like frustrating because I spent a good half hour, 45 minutes just editing and splicing that video, and then another half hour trying to get it put together, and to have all that work just taken away, that's very aggravating for people. So I understand where a lot of goths were coming from and why they left YouTube, because YouTube, slapped a lot of goths in the face when they were out here bringing great content. And I remember from about 2014 to about 2017, they were bringing some awesome content, because it used to be there was goth videos almost every week. And when I was going to the library, that was something I actually looked forward to. And I would download the videos and I would watch them at home. And certain YouTubers, I would watch their videos right there in the library because I had so much to do. I was looking for work and I was trying to promote books at the same time. And I was writing books in the Spinster Ella trilogy. I was working hard, grinding. And one of the things that was as part of my research, as I was trying to do research for the other books in the Spinster Ella trilogy, I was watching a lot of goth videos, and people were putting out videos every week, and it was just disheartening when around 2017, later 2017 or 2016, I was like, whether they had the adpocalypse, I just started seeing goths disappear, and it was like the whole scene just wound up disappearing. And I just wish there was a way we could get a lot more people to start, trying to build a new platform for goths, because again, a lot of Black kids, they want to know, but there's nobody out here sharing the information with them so that they can understand, the truth about the scene. That's one of the reasons, again, I'm doing a live stream, because I want people to know that there is a place for Black people in the scene. And what they did was, a lot of Black kids, they just told that this is white, this is acting white, and that's not true at all. And that whole acting white argument, that's something that has annoyed me ever since I was 12 years old, because I was told that, I'm acting white because I speak well and I dress well. And that's just you being normal. I know during the times of the Emancipation Proclamation, those were considered positive things. But today we get told that it's acting white and exploring different cultures and trying to find yourself. We're told that's acting white, when that's about the darker shade of Black, which is the best shade of Black, because again, you are defining your Blackness by your terms, and you are defining your Blackness by your standard. So that's something that I want to see more kids do. And that's, again, why I wrote the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, because I want those kids to know that there is a goth subculture, there are Black goths who are part of the scene, and that there is a place for Black people in the scene, and that there are people who want to see Black people in the scene. And I remember going to the Facebook group, Gothic Community, and they, over the last couple of weeks, have been really posting up a lot of pictures of Black people in the scene. And I usually go over there sometimes when I want to post a goth video, or I want to promote one of the books in the Spinster Ella trilogy, or some of my other darkly inclined fiction, like The Temptation of John Haynes, the Isis Night of the Vampires, Isis Bride of Dracula, and Isis Escape from Transylvania, and the start of the John Haynes series, John Haynes: A Conversation with Death. Whenever I want to publish, I'm going to promote one of my darkly inclined fiction books, I head over there to the Gothic community on Facebook, and they, again, have been very open to me and very supportive of me. And they've also been very supportive regarding putting up images of Black goths and putting up information, sharing with other Black goths. And they have, over the last couple of weeks, really have been posting up a lot of images of Black goths. I am George asks, have I ever seen any pictures of the Black goths from Africa? No, I haven't. I've seen some other pictures Justin King posted of a lot of Black goths who had the natural hairstyles. She did a whole video on that. But I haven't seen any Black goths from Africa. And again, thank you for talking about that, because people need to know that there are Black goths in Africa, and they need to know, again, this is an international scene, and there are, again, goths all over this world, but again, don't get any press whatsoever here in America, I believe, again, due to both the Black media and the white media blacking out the whole Black goth scene. And that's something that is really a shame overall. It's something I just get disgusted when I think about it, because we have this great media platform, but we don't really talk about they talk about diversity, but we don't talk about diversity in the Black community, and we don't talk about things as related to Black people living different lifestyles. So that was something that, again, is part of the mission of my SJS Direct imprint, is I want people to not only get positive stories about the Black experience, but I want them to get a better understanding of the world and the Black community and see how diverse it is. I see people's ask me to do more of these live streams, and I do more of these live streams usually on Wednesdays around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. But I did this nighttime live stream because I know of so many Black Goths out here, and and so many baby bats, they want to know about the scene. And I did this nighttime one so that those kids would have an opportunity to learn about the scene. So I'm glad you're enjoying this live stream, but I did this one because I love the goth scene and I want more kids to find out about it, and I want them to find their place in it if they want to be a part of it, and I want them to learn more about it. So that's why I'm doing the live stream, because I want to break a few of the stereotypes and refute a lot of the stereotypes about the goth scene, and I want people to have really good information so they can start exploring the goth scene and learning more about it for themselves. I'm going to stay for another maybe 10 minutes, and then I'll wrap up the stream. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. But I'm really enjoying the stream. I'm really enjoying sharing with everyone about the goth subculture. Again, this is a subject I'm very passionate about because, again, as a darkly inclined person, I have always... Oh, I Am George sent me a link, and he showed me Black representation in the post-punk scene. And yeah, these are some dope pictures. Yeah, these are really nice. It's a great article. Oh, this is a really great article. Everybody needs to take a look at I Am George's article, talking about about the Black representation in the post-punk goth scene. It's a really good article, and he's showing you going way back to the 70s. Yeah, that's all part of it. Thank you very much for the article, I Am George. Thank you very much. I don't do any DIY. Usually I just wear basic Black clothing that I buy from the store. And that's another thing. A lot of people need to know about the goth subculture. Yeah, there's DIY fashion, but usually you can just buy clothes like Angela Benedict talks about it. If you can find it in Black, you can, have a basic goth wardrobe. Usually when I do dark clothing, I just put on basic Black shirts, or I put on Black check shirts, Black striped shirts, or you can put on gray shirts, and that'll work as goth fashion if you want, with some nice Black jeans. I usually like to buy the Black jeans with the Black thread, and I put it with some Black boots, and that'll work if you want to have a fashion. Bloodsport sees my Voltron. Yeah, those are my deluxe Voltrons. I've had them since 1988. Those are vintage Voltron Deluxes, and that's a part of my toy collection I've had for many years. I've had those since 1988, and that's about 31 years. So I've had those for 31 years because Voltron was my favorite show back in the 80s when I was about 11 years old, and I always wanted the Voltron Deluxes. And my mother got me one in 1988, and my brother got me another one. My mother got me one in 1987. And I've had that 5 line since 87. I've had Vehicle Team from 1988 and the 3 Robots from 88. And I got them all as Christmas gifts. So I originally had the Vehicle Team Voltron Deluxe before, but I wound up playing with it rough, and thankfully my brother found another one back in 88, and I've had it ever since. Um, Luciano's question, I'm going to try to get to that. See if I can find it. Trying to find it. Oh, I can't find it. I'm gonna need you to rewrite it because I can't find it. Okay. Audra Lestrange says she likes to make jewelry. That's nice because goth jewelry is nice. Well, white women are engaging in victimhood because they want attention and they want access to resources because the economy is really tight. So they need the victimhood to get attention, and they also need it to get access to men's resources. Bloodsport asked me if I could do a video about toy collecting. I might just do that in the future. But I'm just trying to get all my stuff out of the cartons. I've had them in bins for a good year or so. I just moved, so I might do a toy collection video soon. Right now, I finally got the Marvel Legends out of the bin and displayed. I finally got the DC superheroes displayed, and right now I'm trying to work on getting the villains displayed next. So I'm still building displays right now. So I will do a full toy tour video soon. And I'll also show you things like my custom Isis and John Haynes figures in that tour. But I'm just still trying to get everything sorted out. And when you have a whole bunch of figures, it's a lot of work getting figures clean because sometimes figures get dusty when they're sitting on display for months at a time, and then you have to go and take them down. And I had to take everything down. I had to take like 4 or 5 shelves of toys down, and now I'm trying to get them cleaned up and get them displayed. But that's what I'm working on right now. But I will do a toy tour soon. Well, thank you, Icy Pupils. Well, I'm happy whenever I talk about the goth scene. It's one of those things that makes me smile. One of those things that makes me feel good. I don't know to think about Matt Reeves' Batman. I'd have to see some of his scenes in order to to assess his ability to perform. So that's something I would have to really focus on when I would see him doing some films. George Rogers makes a good point. White women do want to dominate white men, the white supremacy scene, but usually in the goth subculture, it's a little bit more open. And I don't really, while there are some racists around, a lot of people, they do come out and they shut them down. That's one of the things I loved about the goth subculture is everybody will come in and they will just shut these guys down and they will throw them right out. I remember reading a comic called Goth Ghost Girl where Sergio Quijada and John Shillham Jr., they really make the point in the new issue of Goth Ghost Girl they're raising funds for on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, where they show how goths deal with racists, and they shut those guys down real quick because they don't want that negativity in the scene, and they don't want that representative of the goth scene because they already know that it's already hard enough as it is for a lot of goths out there to deal with people trying to project stereotypes on them. And the last thing they want projected on them is racism. So that's something that a lot of goths, they really fight against and they work against on the regular. And it's something they are very passionate about, is fighting against racism from what I've seen. Because when racists started coming out here and talking about goth as white, they shut that down immediately. I mean, I saw so many people come in and shut that down. It was in force. And that's another thing I liked about the subculture is that people come out in force and they stand up and let people know who they are. So, and what their scene is about and what it means to them. So it's like they protect the scene. And that really reminded me of the old African proverb about a race rising no higher than the moral position of its women. And one of the things I like seeing about the women of the scene is that they have this strong moral position, and they are make efforts to maintain a standard about things. So they don't want the scene becoming corrupted by racists and white supremacists and all these other people. And they want to see more Black people in the scene. From what I've seen, again, on Facebook and what I've seen on YouTube from many Goths who are still here, they want to see more Black people in the scene, and they want to open the door for them to come into the scene. So I want to see that door get opened. And again, that's one of the reasons why I started doing the books Spinster Ella, Spellbound, and the legendary Mad Matilda, because I want kids to have that gateway. I want brothers and sisters to know, again, that there's a place for them in the scene, and that they can find that place in the scene, and they can learn more about the Goth subculture, and they can learn the way I learned by watching YouTube videos and watching websites. And that's how I learned about it, more about it in depth. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I wrote the books of the Spinster Ella trilogy, was because I wanted more people to understand that there are Black Goths in the scene, and that there are Black people who have been a part of the scene for years. And I want them to understand, again, that this scene has been there for them and wants to be there for them. And I'm going to get ready to wrap up the stream right about now, because I have to get up early in the morning tomorrow. And I thank everybody for coming out and being a part of the stream. You can pick up the 3 books of the Spinster Ella trilogy and learn more about African Americans in the Goth subculture. You can learn about Matilda Crawley's baby bat years in Spellbound, and you can then learn about her adolescent phase in legendary Mad Matilda. And you can pick up the final book in the Spinster Ella trilogy, Spinster Ella, on Amazon.com. And if you want to pick up my other darkly inclined Black fiction, like John Haynes' A Conversation with Death, which is for start of the John Haynes series, or Isis Escape from Transylvania, a story where Isis and John Haynes take on Dracula for the second time, and then Isis, Bride of Dracula, second part of the vampire arc, and Isis Night of the Vampires. You can pick up those books on Amazon.com. I wrote those so that you would get an understanding of Black characters in horror and see a positive image of Black characters in horror, because usually when it comes down to Black characters, they usually die in the horror movies. But in these 3 books, I wanted to show that a Black character could be a hero in a horror type story, and they could survive to the end of the story. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote the vampire arc. Or you can pick up the book that's one of the big ones that's darkly inclined, The Temptation of John Haynes, on Amazon.com as well. And all of these books are available on Amazon.com in paperback and ebook. And they give you positive pictures of African Americans in the Goth subculture with the Spinster Ella trilogy. And my darkly inclined fiction gives you positive pictures of Black people in horror stories. So I thank everybody for coming out to the live stream, and I hope to do this again in the future, another evening. Thank you again, and good night.